The poetry, our fourth session of the day is on contributions to literary criticism. Our first speaker is Dr. Vinod Balakrishna on Sri Aurobindo, the literary critic, and then our own Shruti Vidvaikar, Sri Aurobindo on the importance of poet, text, and reader.
Scholars of Sri Aurobindo's thought, ladies and gentlemen, elders, friends, good afternoon. My name is Vinod and I teach English and I head the Department of Humanities at the National Institute of Technology, Tiruchirappalli. And I am, by anybody's guess, the least knowledgeable in this field. I have a lateral entry into this topic, and my credentials are not much in terms of the scholarship about Sri Aurobindo. So I think it was much more than what I deserve, this invitation from Professor Ananda Reddy to make a presentation here. My talk is on Sri Aurobindo as a literary critic. And in this presentation, I shall be profiling Sri Aurobindo with a specific reference to volume 27 of the complete works, The Letters on Poetry and Art. And I shall be talking on 5 topics. It starts with the poet's calling. I have configured the profile of the literary critic based on these 5 points, and I call the first topic the poet's calling, judging poetry, on poetry, the subtlety required of the critic, and the courage of the critic to be in doubt. Now, these are the 5 topics on which I thought I'll profile the literary critic that Sri Aurobindo is. And my first topic is the poet's calling. And I see a likeness, a very strong likeness between Sri Aurobindo's understanding of the critic and Hessi's character of Siddhartha. Each one is a seeker, and each one sets his own agenda, his own standards, and goes after his own soul. There are no standards from outside, and the standards are revealed. I'll read a statement that struck me, a letter 7 July 1947, which reads, I quote, "The only safety for the poet is to go his own way, careless of the blows and caresses of the critics." And this tells me the kind of poet a critic like Aurobindo has in mind, or the kind of poet that Aurobindo himself was. The poet is a lonely seeker, and his seeking for perfection becomes his poems. His poems are a logbook of the levels of perfection he reaches in his seeking. And the idea of writing for or writing about cannot be insisted upon. You don't write for somebody or something. You don't write about somebody or something. In my first presentation, formal presentation on Sri Aurobindo, I like to look at Sri Aurobindo and what he revealed to me through the letters as the poet who waits and not the poet who writes. So I would like to extend that logic, my understanding of this person. You can correct me at the end of my 15 minutes. The experience that is sought is beyond language and beyond the mind, though language and mind are very essential. That is paradoxical, but I think it's not very difficult to understand. Hence, the conventions of language must not become a yardstick for judging the poet. And in this regard, I would like to bring a reference from the Narayaniyam, which is a local legend in Kerala. The Narayaniyam, a very sacred text on the glory of the Lord, Narayana in Guruvayur, there were two scholars who sang the glory of the Lord. One was an exceptional scholar in the language, Narayana Bhattadri, and the other one was a layman, one who was unschooled, Pundanam. And over a particular aspect called Vibhakti in Sanskrit, Mara Prabhu, Amara Prabhu, there was this controversy. And it seems the Lord was pleased even when Pundanam pronounced the enunciation in a wrong manner. And the legend says the Lord was pleased with Pundanam's bhakti than with Bhattadri's vibhakti. You know, that I believe is also the principle as far as language and the language of poetry goes in the scheme of Sri Aurobindo. My next topic is on poetry, where I have 10 different points to make, which is also trying to fence an understanding of the poetry. The first point is, it is a poetry of the beyond. And here there is the reference to a particular poem, The Bird of Fire, for which the response came in a letter, 2nd of December 1933. And the bird there, in fact, one of the most learned scholars of his time, Purani, saw it as a symbol of inspiration, and even he was corrected, because it is much more than the inspiration that a scholar like Purani saw. The bird is the symbol of an inner power that, I quote, has the power of going beyond mind and life to that which is beyond mind and life. Not a quantity we can talk about, not a quantity we can handle in language. I think it is what each one sees, and then it's maybe like what Siddhartha had to tell Govinda. I can't talk about it. Maybe I can kiss you on the forehead and you will have the consciousness of it. And the second point is the relationship between poetry and prose. He says both are kindred. Of course they use words. There is language. But then about poetry, Aurobindo says it's the tongue. Now, how do you define that? It's like trying to put in words the sweetness of your favorite sweet. What is it? Now, you can't talk about it. And maybe, that was the closest Sri Aurobindo came to talking about that essence which distinguishes poetry from prose, the turn. The turn of the words that makes them convey a powerful and moving emotion, and the rhythm which gives them an uplifting passion and penetrating insistence. And I thought the third one then would be on the way he would look at words in poetry. And I see there are two methods. One is a minimalist method and the other is an architectural method. The minimalist method, I believe, is what was enunciated by Professor of Sanskrit here, who spoke about the sutra. Just what is essential. Just the most pregnant sound. You capture it and that becomes the word, and that's the minimalist approach to poetry. The other is the architectural, which Aurobindo admits is what he has demonstrated in Savitri, where the structure, the texture, the effect, everything is factored by the poet in his, shall we say, omniscience, or in the omniscient experience. He is able to get the words or the suggestions, everything that composes or brings out the composite totality of a poem like, of an achievement in poetry like Savitri. My fourth point, as far as the understanding of poetry, is seizing the whole truth in the inconscience. The poem's purpose is not to dazzle the reader. Maybe many of us like that to happen when we read poetry, or like a kind of sensation when we read poetry. But he says that's not the idea. The poem's purpose is to make the reader attentive to certain, or make the reader wait, or prepare the reader for that moment when he is in the right position to receive that total vision, the whole truth. And that is And the present state of inconscience is always there. The potential for realization is there, but then the amount of preparation that the reader brings to the poem, that is what matters. The inconscience is the pristine, pure screen on which the whole truth manifests. Point number 5 is the corollary of this. If it is not this, then what happens is an imperfect transcription where you have a lot of picturesqueness, a rhetorical effect, the pleasure of the indulgence. My love is like a red, red rose, and you like to repeat it and then associate it with cognates that are there in the material world. But, and Aurobindo is very, very large-hearted to even say that even when there are imperfect transcriptions, they still make sometimes good poetry. And the 6th point about poetry is what style is admissible. When you say so much about poetry, then it goes without saying that style is not a preponderant issue, or style is not the kind of issue that one should be bothered about. This is seeking, this is waiting for an experience, this is waiting to touch through your language and mind the possibility of a consciousness. Style has nothing to do with it. And to the question whether it is better for a simple or direct style, as many people would like to have it in poetry, he says one can't make rigid rules like that. Whatever style is successful is admissible. And he says, he compares Wordsworth and Keats, and his Wordsworth was quite direct. Keats was a little oblique with his magical words, but does that make Wordsworth a better poet than Keats? You know, I think he answers that with this rhetorical question. And this is a point which I always I love this, and you must pardon this indulgence on the part of the speaker. This is on sincerity in poetry, and 2 points, sincerity and morality. And there are 2 people he takes. One person, Oscar Wilde for sincerity, and Baudelaire for morality. You know, Oscar Wilde is a person he does not like, but this is where we need to respect the man, because he's able to evaluate a person outside the frame of personal preferences or personal affiliations. And that is remarkable about this critic. Not somebody who would like to make an apology for poetry because he's a poetry, or try to attack an argument because it doesn't follow your school of thought. And he says, no arguments, a lot of insincerity in Oscar Wilde, full of posturing, he says, but a marvelous artist of speech. He is prepared to give credit where credit is due, which comes from a mind which is at a different level. It is not judging. It's a mind that is waiting to receive the goodness that is there in the world. And that comes when somebody points out to a particular reference of indolence in Baudelaire. Baudelaire compares it to a woman who was, all Aurobindo scholars know this, and pardon me, I can't go beyond this point. And he compares it to a woman in an indolent state, and then he says, isn't this vulgar? Isn't this immoral? And then he says, what do you expect in Baudelaire more than what Baudelaire has done? Baudelaire can only be Baudelaire, and don't expect Homer out of Baudelaire. You know, that's fantastic. And he says, what's the immorality? If it is indolence, this comparison is the finest possible. Can't you see? You know, why do you see something other than poetry there? Vulgarity and immorality. This is not a case for closing that argument. But what on earth did you expect from Baudelaire beyond what he has written? Baudelaire had to be Baudelaire. But then, you know, he goes on to talk about Baudelaire was never vulgar, you know, that's coming down to a level. He says, look at what he does. He doesn't go to a rose or a diamond to talk about the finer aspects of life. He takes an even more difficult task of bringing beauty or Satchit Ananda even in an aspect of evil. And that is remarkable. And don't you see that? Only Aurobindo saw that, you know, like, I don't know. And point number 8 in his poetry is the poetry of the beyond. And this, once again, reference to the bird. And point number 9 is about free verse. And he says, Free verse is what your English professor would insist on in terms of its meter, its feet, and so on. But he talks about the spirit of the free verse because it's not about getting your pentameters right and getting your rhythm wrong. It's getting your rhythm right all the time because that is the ultimate goal and not about getting your pentameter right. I think that is a fundamental problem with many Indian writers in English because language itself is a barrier. All the time I'm concerned about how my English would look in the eyes of an Englishman, and that takes away from my poetry. So my women are not as beautiful as they ought to be. My experience is not as sincere as it ought to be, and I am vulgar. So that happens in poetry. And the 10th point is rhythmic as the true poetic effect, where he says, and there he says, if there is a flat movement, that is your confirmation that there is something called a rhythmic effect. Because when there is a flat movement, it immediately sets the ear asking for the absent rhythm. So that means your soul is actually in tune with a finer rhythm, and your poetry, your language must put you in touch with that. When do I close? No. The rest is understood. I have 3 more points, but I will. I'm given 2 more minutes. Thank you very much. And yeah, there are 3 more points, and this much about the poetry part. But what I also like, and the more important part is, I marked it like a crescendo. The third part, which I'm not going to elaborate, is the most important part, where he is somebody who is capable of making subtle distinctions between originality and truth. Fallaciously, we can equate the two, but he says what is original need not be the truth, and the truth is more important. And those kinds of subtle distinctions between what is an epic and something that looks like an epic, the difference being an epic ring, and you only need that ear, and many have a wooden ear and you don't get the ring. And the last part where I close my talk is on the critic's capacity to be in doubt, not to be this omniscient person who says, I know, I judge, this is what I think. He says, I don't know. I am helplessly swimming in a sea of conjectures. If somebody can say that, he is also admitting that he is going through this process, confirming the fact that it is an eternal seeking. Thank you very much.
Set the atmosphere, and I'm afraid I might spoil it because it has gone up, and I don't think I'll be able to maintain that tempo. To introduce myself, I'm Shruti Vidwaikar, and I'm really nervous today because I have so many of my guides, gurus, teachers, mentors here, which is usually not the case because I have only Dr. Reddy or Belu or Larry here, but I have Dr. Gautam Ghoshal here. Dr. R.Y. Deshpande. I'm happy Dr. Murli has left. And my father also is here, who has been equally training me for standing behind the podium. I'm really afraid today. I hope I don't let him down. I'm doing my PhD on Sri Aurobindo's poetics, trying to explore his poetics, trying to understand the future poetry and his letters on Savitri and his other correspondence. I think that's enough. So the topic I had chosen was Sri Aurobindo on the importance of poet, text, and reader. And I'm happy with the kind of discussion we had just half an hour before and the tempo that Sir has set in, because there are many questions and queries that have cropped up, and I'm happy Sri Aurobindo has given answers to all of them, so now I'll go and explore them more. So only one thing, I'm going to here share all that I have discovered through my thesis. There's nothing new that I'm going to bring out. The only thing is I'm going to share the joy of having discovered whatever I have learned till date. What do we understand by poetics essentially? I might not able to define, but just to throw ideas around, poetics or literary theory or literary criticism, as we call it in English literature, is an art of appreciating literature, whether whether a prose work or poetry. So now, Sri Aurobindo also says that it is an art, and the critic has a special role. All of us who are not technically trained to be critics still critique a text. We sometimes discuss on a novel, a pulp fiction as we call it, maybe Agatha Christie's novels or anything, and then we discuss as to how did we like it or how the person likes it, and especially a great enthusiasm about Chetan Bhagat's novel, where we get extreme kinds of responses to it, because I myself don't find anything in it. And there are people who recommend, you should read it, Shruti, it is very interesting. So these are a few these things, and then how do we critique it? What do we look into a text for? Essentially three things involved into making a text or making a meaning, or as Dr. Murli had pointed out, the artha and the shabda, when they come together to make a sahitya, how do we understand the sahitya? Essentially poet, text and reader are involved, the three elements involved in making or understanding of any text is poet, text and the reader. Sri Aurobindo had very clearly, he has given clear definitions about who a poet is. He is not merely a person writing verse, he is not merely a person writing something that is organized in a particular way, a particular word order, but he was a kavi, a drishta, a seer poet, essentially. So there are more names, as Dr. Murli had pointed out. I'll skip on that, but Dr. Vinod Balakrishnan brought out an interesting point as to what is the difference between prose and poetry. I'm skipping a bit of it, but just to bring in that point, in last lecture by Dr. R.Y. Deshpande, he brought out beautiful pieces of prose and he read it to us, and we could never make out whether he was reading prose or poetry. And he read from Sri Aurobindo's text, Bande Mataram, the Life Divine, Synthesis of Yoga, and some other texts. None of them were actually poetry in the sense we thought it to be, but they were all poetic. It had a meter, it had pentameter, it had different kinds of iams, as he pointed out. So then what is the essential? Is it the structural difference that makes poetry, or is it the rhythm? Is it the inner? There is something inner that makes poetry. Then what is the role of the poet in making such kind of poetry? When we say Sri Aurobindo was through and through a poet, what is it? He wrote more prose than he wrote poetry. If we compare the volumes, Savitri and Collected Poems, and then his prose works. Yet, why does he call himself a poet, or why do we consider him as a poet par excellence? Because he wrote so much of poetry. I remember reading a letter quoted by Srinivas Iyengar in his book, where he says Manmohan Ghosh would come running to Sri Aurobindo, and he was alarmed that Sri Aurobindo, you're writing poetry through journalism. What are you? It is poetry, spreading nationalism through poetry. So he was astonished at Sri Aurobindo's capacity, and he was afraid that he was writing literature and not was into journalism. So this is how we have Sri Aurobindo, the poet, a poet through and through, from Bande Mataram to Savitri. And so his own definition of poet being a yogi, a kavi, a drishta, one who has the capacity of drishti and shruti both. It is he was the visionary. He was capable of having visions of not only future, of the past, the capacity of Trikala Drishti, of all the Sapta Chatustaya that, I'm sorry, I'm not able to spell it properly, even pronounce it properly, but as Sampadananji said, all those faculties he had which made his vision more and more powerful, the vision of the past, present and future, the capacity of Trikala Drishti in him. Then what is a text? How do we relate to a text? When we pick up any book, any novel, any poetry, anything, when we pick up, what essentially strikes us is the idea, the thought, the language. But then how do we interact with a text? It is our consciousness. I had a very interesting example in my own class when I was in MA. I had a bookmark which had Sri Aurobindo's lines on it, and we students usually in the university are, I shouldn't say, but we are at times in a very pervert and vulgar mood, and we deconstruct everything, even if it is a spiritual thing people start deconstructing, and we had come out of the class of the literary criticism, and people started deconstructing that statement when they found. And I don't remember the statement exactly, but they had to make very vulgar remarks about it. And I thought such a sublime sentence by Sri Aurobindo is being deconstructed in a way where it is becoming pervert and vulgar. But then that is how we interact with every text. We give our own meaning to even whether it's a line, whether it is the whole novel, whether it's a poetry. So we are interacting with the text with our own consciousness, and then giving it the meaning. Again, if one had read Sri Aurobindo, or my friends had read Sri Aurobindo at length, maybe there would have been a change, because only it was a sentence and they were not in a good mood that time, so they deconstructed it. But I would say when we are I personally, when I'm in a distressed state and I start reading Savitri, it really relaxes. It really pulls all that anger or all that aggression down. So that is the interaction of my consciousness. Maybe if it wasn't at a good level yet when I read Savitri, because Sri Aurobindo has infused his consciousness into it. His consciousness is merged into the text. I'd like to, I wanted to read a letter, a conversation in the evening talks by Sri Aurobindo, where he makes a beautiful distinction between a poet trying to convey something and a poet trying to express something. Actually, not a poet. He was talking about 3 paintings where he says it depends if the artist wants to convey something or he just wants to express something. And if we relate this to poetry, we can see Sri Aurobindo's poetry as through and through expression. He is not trying to convey, to moralize, to give an idea, to give a thought, nothing. He is simply expressing. His poetry on nirvana, his poetry on transformation, on inconscient, on Krishna, Shiva, everything. He is simply expressing his experience. He is not conveying he is not giving any moral judgment to us or do's and don'ts. He is not doing that. And then how do we interact with that text? It is up to our consciousness. And that brings us to the reader. How is the reader interacting? What is the consciousness? That's why many of, in fact, all of my guides and gurus and my parents have always told me, before reading Sri Aurobindo, meditate for a while. Gather yourself, integrate yourself, only then should you start reading him, because it is very important that we integrate ourselves to be able to read him, to be able to open ourselves to him. So these are the things. But of course, Sri Aurobindo has written an important thing about poet and the reader, that there is an amount of preparation which is required on the part of the poet and on the part of the reader to be able to create or to be able to understand any text. And that preparation is the preparation of consciousness, which he talks about, which he is always very conscious of, because even if we see Sri Aurobindo's own evolution as a poet, he has prepared, he has read a lot of Sri Aurobindo, he had an inborn genius of being a poet, but then he did not say that I am an inborn poet, so I will not read anything else, but just create. He read the world poetry, he read Indian poetry, he read everything under the sun, I should say, every philosophy, everything, and then he created. So there was a necessary preparation. And in one of his letters he says, even the people who have the inborn genius do not create the best of their works when they are young. So the best of their works come only when they are little old, when they have prepared themselves enough. Exactly with the readers, and it goes very well with his writings on the Vedas, where he says Vedas were given to the initiates, because that level of preparation on the part of the reader or the listener is very much required when a text is to be grabbed, or a text is to be a text is to be read by a reader, or heard by him. So that's the only, I've just thrown ideas on poets, text, and the reader here. And I'm sure, I mean, there's lots to speak, lots to work on it, and Sri Aurobindo's writings on the future poetry, his writings on the secret of the Veda, on the Upanishads, and his letters throw ample light on all of these, and it is a sheer delight to read and discover all these that he has said. Thank you.